It's that time of year again. No, not time for the Game Awards. Nobody cares about that. It's time for like the 1 to 2 months leading up to the Game Awards, where everyone gets to pretend they're a games journalist, talk about their favorite games, accuse the whole show of being rigged, and then forget who won literally anything like a week later. It's great! And this year seems to be no different, with plenty of great nominations and people already yelling at each other about which masterpiece is better. And look, Expedition 33, Silk Song, I'm happy for ya, I'ma let you finish, but Blue Prince is the greatest game of all time. This thing absolutely slaps. These awards are a sham. What even is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2? What is that? What do you mean there was a first one? But I'm not here to talk about any of these silly opinions. I'm here to talk about the cold, hard facts. 11 years of this show has given us a treasure trove of data to sift through, trends to find, and random trivia facts to uncover. Have you ever wondered what the most successful studio is? Or the average release date of Game of the Year winners? Or maybe you want to find out which game is winning the big one this year before it even happens. Well then, strap in, because I've got a chart or a spreadsheet for your every query. This is the Game Awards by the numbers. Richard, hit that intro. Here's a quick stat to blow your mind at the start. A grand total of 589 games have been nominated for at least one award over the 12 years of the Game Awards. Now that sounds like a lot, until you realize that each show has around 17 to 18 game-specific categories a year, and each category gets 4 to 6 nominees, meaning the total nomination slots should be well into the thousands. That's because, as I'm sure you've noticed this year in particular, games can get nominated for multiple categories in a given year. Claire Obscura Expedition 33 received 11 total nominations in 2025, which is the record for the most in a single year. However, it is surpassed in total nominations by Destiny 2 and Fortnite, thanks to categories like Best Ongoing Game and Community Support, which allow for games from previous years to qualify and rack up those nominations. At this point, it's basically a given that Fort will nab at least 2 slots a year. But a lot of nominations doesn't necessarily lead to a lot of gold. Of its 15 total nominations, Fortnite has only won 3 times, while Destiny has won 0 of its 13 nominations, giving it the statistically worst track record. If you want the game draped in the most gold, look no further than The Last of Us Part 2, which won 6 of its 8 categories in 2020, including the coveted Game of the Year. But that's looking at every single category, and let's be honest, a lot of these are just here to pad the runtime and give more room for ad breaks. You want to know the top dog, the big kahuna, the Game of the Year. Now obviously, no game has ever been nominated more than once, but Nintendo and From Software are tied for the most nominations at 5 apiece, followed closely by Capcom with 4. However, FromSoft is the only studio with the coveted distinction of walking away with the grand prize twice. Once in 2019 for Sekiro, and once in 2020 for Elden Ring. So if you want to win Game of the Year, maybe don't release it the same year as the next Souls game. But that begs the interesting question. When should you release your game? Is there a certain time time of year that gives you a better chance of winning? Should you get it in right before the show and coast on that recency bias? Or let it age like a fine cheese throughout the year? Well, that question is a little bit tricky to find out, but here's what I did. First, I recorded the month of release for every game that has been nominated for Game of the Year. Then I compared that to several datasets that I found containing the release dates for pretty much every game, period. I looked at all the games. I did that so that I could compare the nomination rates for each month to the total game releases for each month. Yes, a lot of games from September get nominated for awards, because a lot of games come out in September. Comparing these two allows us to find that games released in October and March tend to perform disproportionately well at the show of shows. November, December, and January tend to struggle. They're either too close or too far from the show, though interestingly, April also ranked quite low. Is that why Blueprints didn't make it? Is it some conspiracy against the month of April? I gotta add that to my notes. Of course, the specific date you release your game doesn't really matter if your game is bad. Or perhaps just doesn't fit the mold, because it turns out that Game of the Year nominees tend to follow very similar trends. The vast majority of nominated games, and almost all the winners, are primarily single-player 3D action or platforming games. Of the 68 total nominations, there are only 8 that fall somewhere outside these lines. Games nominated for Game of the Year also tend to be from big AAA studios like Nintendo and Sony, but not exclusively. As has become very clear in recent years, the qualifications for an indie game have become a little bit vague, but over the years, 8 games have managed to qualify for both Game of the Year and Best Independent Game of the Year. None of them have ever won the big prize, but every indie game that was nominated for Game of the Year has won the Best Independent Game of the Year. Which, makes sense. If there was another better indie game, then it probably would have been nominated instead. For a while, there was a very consistent pattern of one independent game nominated for Game of the Year every other year. But all those patterns are about to be shattered, because this is the first year with 3 independent game nominations. And none of them were Blueprints? Get over here! But look, all that stuff, win rates, deep injustices, nomination records, it's all in the past. What about the future? What about the part of the video that's gonna age like milk? Can we use cold, hard data to predict the Game of the Year before it's even out? Well, yeah, probably. According to the Game Awards website, most major categories get 90% of their input from a jury of specialists and journalists, and 10% from community votes. So, the next thing I did was collect the Metacritic scores for all 68 Game of the Year nominees, and record both their critic scores and their user scores. Knowing that the jury's vote is weighted 9 times more than the community, it should come as no surprise that a game's critic score is a very strong predictor of the Game of the Year. So get ready to be surprised! What I found was that the game with the highest critic score in a given year's pool wins the big prize just 45% of the time. Now, since each year has 4 to 5 nominations, if the yearly winner was completely independent of critic scores, we'd expect to get an 18% success rate. So a game's critical acclaim is an okay predictor of its odds of winning, but according to the data, the people actually get it right slightly more often, at 54%. So in cases where the critics and the users disagree, like this year, you're slightly better off betting on the people. Now, of course, in years where the people and the critics agree on the best game, it's not a surprise that that game will almost always win. So get ready to be surprised again, because 4 of the 6 games that were rated the highest across the board ended up losing the Game of the Year. So everyone pour one out for our snubbed kings and queens: Bayonetta 2, Uncharted 4, Mario Odyssey, and Resident Evil 2 Remake. And Blueprints. That being said, neither of these predictors are perfect. But if the people and the critics can't predict the Game Awards, then maybe they can predict themselves. A lot of people assume that since Expedition 33 got so many nominations, it's basically guaranteed to win the big prize. And admittedly, no game has ever been as dominant as this one in a given year, but just like the others, the game with the most nominations only takes home the grand prize around half the time. And now it's my turn to be surprised because, well, no, turns out there's no way to definitively predict the Game of the Year ahead of time. Looking at this year's pool, Expedition 33 does have the most nominations and the highest Metacritic user score, but the best we can give it is a 50-50 shot of winning. Sometimes that Game Awards jury just likes to be special little snowflakes who throw in a unique pick every once in a while to show how quirky they are. You know, we're not like most Game Award juries, okay? We didn't nominate Blueprints because we have bad tastes. I mean, that's the only possible explanation I can think of. Unless it goes even deeper than that. Oh my god, I can't believe I didn't see it before. If nobody, not the people, not the critics, not even the Game Awards themselves can reliably predict the Game of the Year, then who can? Who is this mysterious jury of industry specialists? And why are you being so cagey about it, Jeff? Where are you getting the money to hire a full orchestra year after year after year, Jeff? And why do the same companies seem to get nominated again and again, Jeff? This data hasn't revealed a few fun trivia facts. It's exposed a whole conspiracy. The Game Awards are a lie, a propaganda show put out by Nintendo and Sony, bankrolling the show so they can buy up all the prizes. Ho ho, Richard, you run those numbers again. We're gonna bust this whole thing wide open. You hear that, Sony? You hear that, Nintendo? Your time is up. This little charade, this carny circus ring is coming crashing down. We'll be your fools no longer. We'll rise up. We'll vanquish the— What? Oh, no, never mind. Seems like you're good. Yeah, so inevitably, every time the Game Awards come around, a certain side of the internet likes to put on their tinfoil floppy detective hats and accuse major companies like Sony and Nintendo of buying the awards, since they've publicly backed the show in the past. And to be fair, Nintendo, and to some extent Sony, depending on how you want to count partnerships and publishing credits, have been nominated more than any other company, and it's not even close. But only because they release a crap ton of games. It's not some subtle corporate espionage. It's about as subtle as a shotgun approach. Based on the data, I wasn't able to find any evidence of preferential treatment towards these big studios. Compared to the vast number of games that they put out, smaller studios like Team Cherry and Larian actually have a much better nomination and success rate, and the lowest rated games to ever be nominated for Game of the Year were Black Myth Wukong and PUBG. If a game from one of these big studios got nominated, according to the numbers, it probably earned it. And even when they do get nominated, well, they don't win that often. So why does Sony and Nintendo continue to support the Game Awards if they're not even gonna rig it in their favor? I mean, what, is it out of the goodness of their hearts? Is it the true spirit of the Game Awards? No, of course not. But if you were paying attention, I told you the answer to this question from the very beginning. No, not time for the Game Awards. Nobody cares about that. Pad the runtime and give more room for ad breaks.
The architect, an empty blueprint, represents a world of possibilities.
The most valuable prize one can win at the Game Awards isn't some meaningless trophy or the respect and adoration of their peers. It's eyes. This show regularly gets tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of views. A vast pool of gamers all looking for the next big thing. Big companies like Sony and Nintendo actually have a very poor track record when it comes to winning awards, but they're incredibly consistent when it comes to announcing new games and showing trailers. Who cares about winning awards for games that are already released? Most people who are gonna play it probably already did. They don't fund the Game Awards to pat themselves on the back. It's an investment, a free advertising opportunity cosplaying as the Oscars. Which, I'm saying like it's some nefarious plot, but it's actually pretty cool. Let's support an event where people can come together and celebrate their loves of games. And while you're here, we'll show you some new things we've been working on that you might be interested in. And so, it seems the only real conspiracy afoot here is why Blueprints wasn't nominated. Look, I'm not saying that Silksong or Expedition 33 are bad. They're like a delicious hamburger. Maybe the best you've ever had. And then an angel descends from heaven and says, "Here, my child, I give unto you the greatest thing any mortal has ever tasted. It will enrich the mind and feed the soul." And you didn't even nominate it? Are you stupid? Could you not figure out the breaker box puzzle? Is that it? It's not that hard. And of course, a massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, including Alex, Alakazam, Big Dog Ty for to win, Captain Kirby, Sidian, Sherry and Mark, Stylish, The Boss Killer 94, Ty Studio, and Moki Ubu.